Imagine this. You are standing on the edge of a rooftop at twilight, city lights flickering beneath you like 1,000 possible lives. Wind brushes your face, but behind your eyes, an even stronger current howls. An endless swirl of what-ifs, half-finished sentence, alternate endings, phantom disasters. You lean forward, not to jump, but to listen. Can you hear how loud your mind has become? Each heartbeat is muffled by the thunder of calculations, reruns of yesterday's dialogue, rehearsals for tomorrow's confrontation, revisions of decisions already made. In the time it takes a single neon sign to flicker on, you have lived and died 100 theoretical deaths, none of them real, all of them exhausting. Do you feel the weight of possibilities stacking up behind your ribs like unread love letters? You wonder, what if I had spoken sooner? What if I stay silent now? What if staying silent is another form of betrayal? A single choice fractures into a hall of mirrors, each reflection more distorted, more menacing. You reach for certainty the way drowning hands claw for air, yet every answer you touch dissolves into another question, another corridor. Is this vigilance or self-sabotage? Is it wisdom to anticipate every storm, or cowardice dressed in logic's clothing? Your brain says you are preparing. Your pulse suggests you are perishing. Look closer. The rooftop is only a metaphor, but the vertigo is real. Overthinking is a clever assassin. It never pushes you off the ledge. It convinces you to step back again and again, until you forget you ever wanted to leap into anything. It murders in slow motion, strand by invisible strand. Your spontaneity, your courage, your capacity to risk being wrong. You keep breathing, but the circle of the possible tightens like a noose of invisible thread. How many dreams have you found lifeless at your feet, strangled by the endless drafts you wrote in your head? Pause and ask yourself, who benefits from this private tribunal that never adjourns? Is your conscience truly the judge, or is fear holding the gavel? When did caution mutate into paralysis? You pride yourself on being thorough, but thoroughness is not the same as aliveness. A surgeon's scalpel can save a life. Wielded indefinitely, it simply keeps cutting. So which is it doing to you? Here then is the uncomfortable paradox. You think in order to live better, yet the very act becomes the slowest form of self-erasure. What if every brilliant scenario you calculate is a bead of poison, sugarcoating an incremental suicide? What if each redundant rehearsal is a needle draining color from the present moment? Overthinking does not arrive as a villain. It arrives as a guardian angel with a clipboard, promising safety while quietly clocking your expiration date. And still, one question hammers at the door of your skull, impossible to ignore. If thinking is our highest gift, how can it also be the most elegant method of self-destruction? Hold that thought. Grip it the way you would grip the icy railing to keep from slipping, because the descent into this labyrinth has only begun, and the deeper chambers are darker than you imagine. But somewhere inside that darkness glints a key. If you dare to keep moving, you keep moving, downward, inward, until the rooftop wind becomes a pulse deep in your temples. Beneath the surface chatter of daily errands lies a subterranean machinery older than language, and it is here that overthinking takes root. Jung would call it the shadow, but you might recognize it as the dimly lit storeroom where you hide everything polite society told you not to feel. Rage, desire, envy, raw animal urgency. Each time you suppress a surge of instinct to remain presentable, you add another coil to the labyrinth. Have you noticed how the corridors multiply when you refuse to open the forbidden boxes? You think you are staying safe. In truth, you are populating the maze with ghosts that will demand endless diplomatic negotiations inside your skull. Zoom out a layer. Nietzsche warned, that when you stare too long into the abyss stares back. Yet nobody told you the abyss begins behind your own eyelids. You overthink because you can sense the wildness you have dammed up, and you fear the flood if the dam breaks. So you build ever more elaborate sluice gates of analysis, pro and con lists, contingency maps, infinite conditional statements. Each gate diverts the torrent, but also fragments it, until your mental landscape is a delta of 1,000 anxious rivulets instead of one roaring river of intention. Is this mastery or mutilation? Schopenhauer frames life as the blind striving of the will, a force that cares nothing for your spreadsheets or 5-year plans. Overthinking is your attempt to domesticate that will, to break it like a horse so it carries you, not tramples you. But domestication is a violent art. You train the horse by withholding grass, by tightening reins, by convincing it that obedience equals survival. In the same way, you have broken parts of yourself to harness them. Yet at night, when the stable doors creak, you hear hoofbeats pounding in circles. They remind you that the animal has not forgotten its plains, and neither has your will forgiven the trainer. Neuroscience offers a colder mirror. Inside your skull, the default mode network flickers whenever you are not engaged in an external task. It is the seat of self-referential thought, the author of mental time travel, the whisperer of what-ifs. Evolution wired it to simulate threats so that early humans survived saber-toothed surprises. But in a world where most tigers are deadlines and text messages, the simulator still hungers for catastrophe. So it runs doomsday drills on loop, like a bored security guard testing the fire alarm at 3 a.m. Does that sound like vigilance or torture dressed in corporate uniform? Layer cultural conditioning on top. Capitalism adores an anxious mind because overthinking is a marketplace with infinite upsells. You fret about appearance. There is a serum for that. You agonize over productivity. Here's an app that slices your minutes into monetizable units. Each cycle of rumination feeds data to algorithms that reflect your fears back at you in higher resolution. You scroll, seeking relief. But every swipe is a micro-rehearsal of, what am I missing? A tiny spike of tension that trains your nervous system to distrust stillness. Thus, the architecture of commerce fuses seamlessly with the circuitry of your dread, turning private doubts into public revenue. Who wins that bargain? Let's not forget family lore, those bedtime stories of caution that sounded like love. Perhaps you were praised for being the responsible one, the child who checked the locks twice. Praise is addictive. You learned that hypervigilance buys affection. Now, decades later, the phantom hand of parental approval still tweaks the volume knob on your inner commentator. Ask yourself, how many of your obsessive loops are simply echoes of a voice that is no longer in the room? And why does that voice still own the keys to your peace? Cognitive science catalogs more subtle saboteurs. Confirmation bias assures that once you suspect disaster, you'll interpret neutral signals as evidence. The unread email becomes bad news. The friend's delayed reply foreshadows abandonment. Catastrophizing extends every minor variable into a domino chain ending in ruin. Meanwhile, choice overload turns abundance into paralysis. When 50 shades of possibility flash before you like strobe lights, you freeze, convinced the one you select will define, and likely doom, your trajectory. Each bias promises to protect you, yet together they weave a net that tightens every time you struggle. Notice how identity sneaks into the engine room. You call yourself a thinker, a strategist, perhaps even a perfectionist, and each badge welds another gear into place. To change the system would threaten the very story that makes you intelligible, to yourself and to others. Better to stay in the familiar panic than risk becoming someone you don't yet recognize. Kierkegaard spoke of the dizziness of freedom. Overthinking is your attempt to steady the spinning by shrinking the horizon. But can a cage ever serve as a compass? All of this culminates in a subtle self-betrayal. You conflate consciousness with caution, depth with delay, insight with inertia. You forget that thought was evolved to serve life, not replace it. Picture a ship's captain who spends so long updating the map that the wind dies and the voyage stalls. The crew, your emotions, your senses, your impulses, waits restlessly on deck, eyes on a horizon that keeps receding with every recalculation. How long before mutiny brews below? And so you arrive at the deeper pit you suspected. Overthinking is not merely a habit, but a multi-layered ecosystem. Psychic shadow, evolutionary relic, cultural commodity, family inheritance, cognitive glitch, and identity armor. All conspiring to keep you safely nowhere. You stand in the control room pulling levers, unaware that the building itself is designed to loop. The question is no longer why you can't exercise it, but who built the maze, and whether you are willing to dismantle walls erected by centuries of mind, history, and fear. There are darker chambers ahead, yes, but beyond them lies something the labyrinth cannot predict. Are you prepared to keep walking? Picture the unseen threads tightening around your day before dawn even spills over the horizon. You wake, already orbiting hypothetical catastrophes. Will the project implode if you miss one detail? Did last night's half-smile from your partner conceal disappointment? These thoughts seem weightless, just vapor trails across a sky. Yet watch how they quietly reroute your entire flight path. Instead of kissing the morning awake, you scroll, cross-examining messages for hidden landmines. The coffee cools, your pulse escalates, and within 15 minutes, the present moment has been auctioned off to futures that will never happen. How many dawns have died this way, without a sound? Now follow the cascade outward. Because you hesitate to send that bold pitch, a colleague's safer idea prevails, and the company lurches one step closer to mediocrity. Because you rehearse rejections that haven't occurred, you decline an invitation that could have rewritten your friendships. Overthinking seldom kills with a gunshot. It replaces one living possibility after another with a cardboard replica, until your personal landscape is a museum of exhibits labeled, "What could have been." Do you feel the chill in those galleries? That is the climate-controlled air of regret. Physiology keeps the books on every silent forfeiture. Each loop of rumination coaxes cortisol to drip, drop by invisible drop, into your bloodstream. Over time, the hippocampus, the librarian of memory, atrophies, while the amygdala, the fire alarm, grows trigger-happy. You become a fortress lit by floodlights, yet riddled with rusted gates. Vigilance is high, judgment is fogged. Researchers measure this in diminished REM cycles, elevated resting heart rates, microspasms in neck muscles that never fully unclench. But do you need a lab report to confirm what your shoulders already know? Shift the lens to society, and the personal malaise scales into a collective trance. Entire boards schedule alignment meetings that multiply like rabbits, chewing hours into mulch while decisions starve. Governments commission white papers that weigh more than the bridges they debate. Bridges that remain unbuilt as deadlines turn to dust. Climate summits finalize frameworks while glaciers liquefy into nameless oceans. Do you see the pattern? When a culture sanctifies analysis without action, entropy gains citizenship. The lights stay on, the documents thicken, but the engine of change idles, coughing fumes of rhetoric. Meanwhile, algorithms feast on your hesitation. Every pause, every reread, every backspaced sentence is tagged, timed, and sold as a breadcrumb that predicts your next stall. The longer you hover over the Buy Now button, the more persuasive the pop-up discount becomes, an external embodiment of your internal debate. Thus, overthinking fuels the very ecosystem that monetizes your attention, converting private paralysis into quarterly growth. Ask yourself, in this trade, who harvests the profit and who harvests the ulcers? There are subtler casualties too. One's no metric tracks. Creativity, that feral spark, despises committee meetings inside the skull. It arrives unshaven, smelling of thunder, and expects you to follow it down alleys unlit by guarantees. Yet each time you postpone the scribble, the riff, the prototype until the concept is fully formed, you teach the spark that it is unwelcome. Eventually, it stops knocking. How many poems were buried beneath spreadsheets? How many revolutions died in folders labeled Draft V27 Final? Consider intimacy. Overthinking in relationships is a phantom third person at every meal. Your partner pauses before answering, and you draft 3 alternate explanations, all grim, before they sip their water. You rehearse rebuttals to arguments that have not surfaced, and thus speak to them from a future conflict they haven't yet imagined. Slowly, conversation becomes border patrol. Trust erodes not by betrayal, but by the constant insinuation that catastrophe is imminent. Love suffocates under the weight of just in case. On the macro scale, cultures of chronic cognitive looping manufacture citizens who prefer critique to construction. Social media platforms glow with forensic dissections of missteps, while bold proposals bleed out in comment sections. The safest stance becomes ironic distance. The bravest act, perhaps, is earnest commitment. Yet commitment requires picking a direction before every variable is known, an idea almost heretical in the era of infinite scroll. When a populace idolizes certainty, history stalls. Innovation demands leaps. Overthinking demands guardrails around every inch of air. The irony, of course, is that the guardrails are illusory. For all the hours you spend simulating disaster, the actual blows in life arrive from angles no mind map predicted. A sudden diagnosis, a phone call at 2 a.m., a geopolitical tremor you had no vote in. In those moments, the mind reaches for its overfamiliar toolbox of hypotheticals and finds only smoke. The real becomes undeniable, and the rehearsed is useless. What then was all the rehearsal for? There is one more consequence, perhaps the cruelest. Overthinking erodes your memory of being alive. When every second is pre-processed, nothing arrives raw. Experience passes through a sieve of commentary before sensation can touch skin. Later, you look back on weeks, months, years, and find them strangely textureless, like photographs, overexposed by analytical glare. Life did happen, but you were busy narrating contingencies to notice its taste. Can a memory starved of flavor nourish any future at all? Pause here. Feel the sum of these invisible costs pooling at your feet, like water in a basement you seldom visit. This is not a warning issued from a pulpit. It is an invoice already stamped past due. You have paid in forfeited dawns, stalled projects, muted art, diluted love, heightened cortisol, cultural inertia, and ghosts of unlived history. If you sense panic rising, good. It means the anesthetic of rationalization is wearing off. Let the discomfort spread. It is mapping the territory you have been too busy charting to inhabit. But do not grab for the nearest solution yet. The labyrinth built itself over decades. A single torch will not reveal every secret. Before we talk of keys and doors, you must first understand the architecture of your own captivity. Only then will any map make sense. So stay with the ringing silence of consequences a moment longer, and listen for the faint hiss of walls that may yet shift if you dare to press. Now begin your mutiny, not with grand speeches, but with tiny, scandalous refusals that crack the concrete under your feet. Overthinking survives on one resource, your complaints. So the rebellion starts the moment you deny it fuel. You do this by choosing decisive friction over theoretical ease, by stepping into the raw present where no contingency plan can shield you. Ready? Good. Keep your eyes open. This is going to sting. 1. Rewrite the contract with fear. You have long mistaken fear for foresight, signing an invisible pact that says, if I worry hard enough, disaster will spare me. Tear it up. When the pulse quickens, practice naming the fear aloud in a single unembellished sentence. I might be rejected. I might fail. I might look foolish. No justifications, no nested clauses. Spoken plainly, fear loses its costume jewelry of speculation and stands naked, often smaller than you imagined. Nietzsche wrote, "All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power. Give power to the interpretation that lets you move, not freeze." 2. Stage micro-experiments in imperfection. Your cerebral court demands flawless briefs before any action. Overrule it with deliberate rough drafts of reality. Send the email while a phrase still sounds blunt. Post the sketch while the shading is uneven. Tell a friend the unedited truth, even if your voice wobbles. These are micro-experiments, contained explosions that teach your nervous system this revolutionary fact. The world does not end when you act before you are ready. Each imperfect launch rewires synapses calcified by caution, proving that the feedback loop of life is kinder and far more instructive than the echo chamber inside your head. 3. Reclaim the body as command center. Thought stages its coups in the skull because it knows your body is the sovereign you abandoned. Reinstall it on the throne. Sprint until lungs burn. Plunge hands into cold water. Taste a tangerine with monk-like attention. Somatic intensity breaks the monopoly of rumination. Sensation speaks in verbs, not hypotheticals. Jung observed that bodily sensations restore the connection with the depths of being. Let muscles, breath, and skin become ground truth. Let intellect be the advisor, not the emperor. 4. Adopt the 48-hour philosophy. Fast. Just as monks fast from food to reveal their cravings, fast from abstract questions for 2 days each month. No what if, no should I. Perform life purely in the imperative mood. Walk, call, build, rest. Keep a pocket notebook. Whenever speculation intrudes, jot it down and tell it. See you on the other side. When the fast ends, review the list. You will notice how many anxieties looked urgent on entry, but appear laughable in retrospect. Phantoms that cannot survive without constant refueling. In this emptier space, authentic dilemmas emerge sharply, asking for direct engagement instead of endless dithering. 5. Invoke historical co-conspirators. Revolutions need role models who already burned the rulebook. Consider Frida Kahlo, who painted pain onto canvas before critics could sanitize it. Or Soren Kierkegaard, who published under multiple pseudonyms to debate himself publicly rather than rot in private incision. Think of Rosa Parks' single act of refusal that rewired a nation's moral circuitry. None waited for universal approval. Each stepped into the arena half-armored, trusting movement over certainty. Pin their portraits where your to-do list usually hangs. When doubt rises, ask, what would they choose? The risk of ridicule or the slow bleed of hesitation? 6. Design a regret budget. Set aside a weekly allowance, 10 minutes perhaps, explicitly devoted to ruminating on past decisions. Schedule it like an appointment. Outside that window, regrets pay double rent, so you cannot afford them. Paradoxically, knowing you will reflect later frees the present from compulsive self-audit. Stoic philosopher Epictetus advised, What is up to us? Schedule the answer, then live the rest. 7. Use the one-way door test. Jeff Bezos once distinguished between two kinds of choices: two-way doors, which can be reversed, and one-way doors which cannot. Overthinking treats every choice as irreversible. Practice labeling decisions realistically. If it's a two-way door, changing a project title, trying a new hobby, decide within 30 seconds. Save deliberation for the true one-way doors, ending a marriage, selling a house. This triage prevents cognitive triathlons over trivialities and reserves mental stamina for moments that merit it. 8. Anchor in embodied time. Rumination flourishes in temporal fog, where past and future collapse into mental simultaneity. Counteract it with tangible chronometers. Light a 20-minute beeswax candle while writing. When the flame dies, stop. Plant basil seeds and mark their sprouting as proof that time is a gardener, not a psychiatrist. Physical timers remind you that moments are meant to be inhabited, not hoarded. 9. Cultivate communities of velocity. Surround yourself with people who prototype faster than they pontificate. Jazz musicians, indie game devs, community organizers, any tribe where iteration outruns ideology. Their collective rhythm entrains your own, normalizing action as conversation. In such circles, perfectionism sounds less like rigor and more like background noise nobody dances to. 10. Practice ritualized ignorance. Choose one domain: global finance, quantum mechanics, celebrity gossip, and intentionally stop updating yourself for a month. Accept being uninformed. The itch you feel is proof of your addiction to potential knowledge rather than applicable wisdom. When the month ends, you will discover the world continued unharmed, and so did you. This loosens the illusion that omniscience is prerequisite to participation. None of these tactics alone is salvation. They are breach charges at different points along the wall. Detonations time to create overlapping gaps. Your task is to sprint through before the fortress self-repairs. Yes, alarms will blare. Yes, the inner critic will shout that you are reckless, naive, exposed. Keep running. On the other side awaits a clearing, where silence has texture, where opportunity has scent, where outcomes are not foregone conclusions, but fresh animals grazing at the edge of vision. One last warning: freedom from overthinking will not feel like floating on clouds. It will feel like vertigo, like stepping onto a rope bridge swaying above uncharted valleys. Good. That instability is the signature of possibility. Train your legs to steady themselves while you move, not before. Because beyond the bridge lies a revelation overthinking could never draft, a truth that rewrites the physics of how you inhabit your own life. And if you're willing to risk the crossing, the final gate is already creaking open. The gate opens. What lies beyond? Step through, and the light feels wrong at first. Too raw, too immediate, like noon sunlight pouring straight into a cave that has mistaken itself for the world. Your reflex is to shield your eyes, to retreat into familiar dimness. But stay. Let your pupils ache. Because here, in the uncluttered blaze of the present, you will glimpse the truth that all your spiral staircases of thought have circled without ever entering. You are not the voice in your head. You are the one who hears it. Pause. Let that sentence settle the way snow settles after an avalanche, revealing a new terrain under the debris. The overthinking mind thrives on a single confession: that existence equals commentary, that being alive equals explaining, predicting, revising. Yet the ear cannot be the echo. The ski cannot be the weather report. Who then are you? You are the canvas before the first brushstroke, the silence preceding any symphony, the heartbeat that starts before you know the word heartbeat. Thought is only an instrument, useful, melodic, sometimes dissonant, but never the musician. Can you feel the room tilt? Good. That vertigo is the ego loosening its claws. It will try to reassert itself with questions. But how will I plan? How will I protect? Answer it gently. Planning still exists. Protection still matters. But they are subsidiaries, not sovereigns. The board has been reorganized. Consciousness is chairperson again. Notice what happens when you grant thought its proper rank. The present moment swells like a lung finally filled. Colors edge toward saturation. Ambient sounds arrange into subtle rhythms. This is not sentimentality, it is neurology. When prefrontal chatter recedes, sensory cortices spike in activity. The world you feared losing control over delivers itself, vivid, unencrypted. The philosopher Martin Heidegger called this Gelassenheit, releasement toward things, a state where letting be reveals more than grasping ever could. Yet do not mistake clarity for idle. Life will still rough you up. Market crashes, hollow-eyed migraines, the shout that ends a marriage. But without the static of obsessive forecasting, pain arrives in its praised dose, not magnified by countless previews. Sorrow wears its rightful shape. Grief completes its cycle. And then, most startling, you discover that joy, too, has been waiting in the wings, uninflated by anticipation yet unimaginably full-bodied. Overthinking had clipped both ends of the spectrum. You were living on a grayscale bandwidth. Now, saturation returns, and with it, agency. Then comes the second shock. Agency is not control. It is participation. Overthinking tried to pilot every variable from a bunker of abstractions, but agency dances in the open with wind and flaw. Think of improvisational jazz. Mastery appears chaotic to the untrained ear, yet every horn player listens, adpiece, repised real time. The music lives because no one can predict every note. Your life, too, was composed for improvisation. The final truth is not that you must stop thinking, but that you must learn to trust what thinks when you don't interfere. The body leans, the intuition hums, the decision happens, sometimes faster than language can keep up. Neurologist Benjamin Liebet's experiments hinted at this long ago. Action potentials fire fractions of a second before conscious intent registers. Your depths have always been steering. The surface commentary merely files the paperwork after. Does that demote intellect? Hardly. It liberates it. Freed from 24-hour security duty, cognition can return to its masterpiece work, forging metaphors, mapping galaxies, curing diseases, writing scripts like this one. Thought at leisure is a stargazer. Thought on leash is a hall monitor. Which would you rather be governed by? So here is the ultimate directive, distilled and perilous in its simplicity. Live as the witness, think as the servant, act as the storm. Witness first, anchor in awareness before agendas arise. Think second, deploy analysis where it amplifies possibility, where it chisels marble instead of sealing tombs. Act third, move while blood is hot, while the clay of circumstances is still soft beneath your fingertips. Reorder these steps at your peril. Swap witness with thought, and the maze rebuilds itself overnight. You may ask, is there a practice, a daily ritual to keep this hierarchy intact? There are many. Mindful breathing, monastic walks, cold water plunges, morning pages, but none are magic wands. They are reminders, doorstops wedged beneath the habit of self-eclipse. The real practice is remembering. In the heat of any moment, the difference between spotlight and stage. Thought illuminates. It does not perform. Let the body speak its line. Let emotion sing its chord. Let intuition strike its drum. The mind will translate later, applauding from the balcony. Imagine returning to the rooftop from our first scene. Same skyline, same wind. But now the decision to lean or leap, or simply stand, becomes not a calculus of doom, but an inquiry into resonance. Which choice vibrates with the core of the witness you have rediscovered? Answer quickly. Life is a live broadcast, not a rehearsal. And if you misstep, the floor of presence is broader than you think. It catches, adjusts, improvises another phrase of music. Perfection was never the contract. Aliveness was. Breathe. Do you sense the hush? That is the soundtrack of regained interior acreage, acres once rented to speculation. In that silence, you will hear faint knocks, old dreams returning, friendships knocking twice, a wild idea testing the doorknob. Let them in. They are here on invitation from the part of you that existed before the labyrinth, the part that will dance long after the last thought dims. Now close the gate behind you, not to imprison the past, but to mark the crossing. Memory will try to smuggle back doubts dressed as customs officials. Identify them by their endless paperwork. Stamp each passport void if not present, and wave them through without inspection. They cannot harm you unless you summon the tribunal again. An ending then, but one that curves back on itself like a Mobius strip. Every moment from here forward is both first draft and final say. There is no backstage where you can overthink the lines. The curtain rises perpetually. Does that terrify you? Good. Fear is the twin of wonder, and wonder is the pulse of the fully awake. Walk out. Breathe in. Speak the next sentence, trusting that the thinker will follow the living, not the other way around. The rooftop awaits, dusk or dawn depending on the angle. Step into it. Let the horizon rearrange itself around your movement. And when night finally folds over the city, and you lie down to rest, may the silence inside your skull feel like a widened ski-fly, not an empty auditorium. Tomorrow, the music begins again. Improvised, irretrievable, vividly your own.